What happened to Sogeking? This is a question that many One Piece fans ask, wondering where the post-time skip appearance of our super sniper hero is, and why Usopp has abandoned one of his finest inventions. So in this video, I'm going to tell you why Sogeking disappeared from this world, as well as why it's unlikely that we're ever going to see him again, and most importantly, who the even greater legend is that has taken his place. So the answer to a lot of this stuff is in a place that no one ever looks, which is Thriller Bark. A lot of the time when we talk about Thriller Bark, we don't really talk about it a lot of the time, but when we do, it's a very isolated discussion. Thriller Bark often feels like its own thing, a more standalone adventure, and that is true for a lot of the crew, but not for Usopp, because Thriller Bark is the true end of a character arc that began for Usopp in Water 7. Much like how Sanji has a Vinsmoke arc that spans across Zou, Whole Cake Island, and ultimately concludes on Wano with him defeating Queen. In much the same way, Usopp has a Sogeking arc that takes place across Water 7, Thriller Bark, and even Return to Sambody. And following that very long piece of story gives us our answer. Going back on Thriller Bark though, it's important to note that at this point, Usopp had just rejoined the Straw Hats, but he still needed to prove his worth. Not to the other crew members, they were happy to accept him for who he is, but to himself. Usopp needed to prove to himself that he wasn't weak, which was one of the key reasons why he left the crew to begin with. Usopp was frustrated that his own weakness led to him being beat up by the Frankie family and having the money stolen. And he was also initially blaming himself for not having the resources to fix the Going Merry because of his weakness. And despite Merry being deemed unable to sail, Usopp also begged Luffy to have faith in Merry's strength, because that's very much how Usopp sells himself. He doesn't look like much, but there is a powerful inner strength there, maybe. So when Luffy decided to part ways with the Going Merry, one of the more heart-wrenching things that Usopp said was that if Luffy was going to abandon the ship, then why wouldn't Luffy do the same with him? And the Water 7 saga did wrap up a lot of these issues, but it left this one quite purposely lingering. Because Usopp did get a moment of redemption on Enies Lobby, being the only one capable of saving Robin by sharpshooting Spandam, but that was done under the guise of Sogeking. And you'll see why that's extremely important as this video goes on. Usopp's true test did not occur during Enies Lobby. It happened on Thriller Bark. Atmospherically, Thriller Bark is a location designed to be Usopp's worst nightmare. This is an island where all of Usopp's ridiculous fears actually become reality. We've got zombies, shadow creatures, mad scientists, horny beast men, and even a thing that Usopp once lied about on Syrup Village, a literal Kerberos, even though one of the heads is a fox. And just like an actual nightmare, nothing on Thriller Bark plays by the established rules you think they should. Like how Usopp believes that zombies are slow, lumbering creatures, but then they all break into a sprint to chase him down. It is horrifying. This island is the epitome of fear and self-doubt, and Usopp was thrust onto it with no backup from the heavy hitters of the Straw Hats. All he had were Nami and Chopper, who were arguably not a lot of help. Usopp, Nami, and Chopper were the ones chosen to explore the island because it was the only way to have the readers and watchers be able to fully experience Thriller Bark, which I don't think happens in any other arc. Usually, Oda has a fixation on experiencing the One Piece world through the eyes of Luffy, the main character. Makes sense. So we mostly explore islands through his perspective. However, Thriller Bark is one of the rare cases where that primary perspective is switched, incidentally making Usopp the main protagonist of Thriller Bark for a large part of its run. Luffy's there, but he's much more in the background. Everything that Usopp initially runs into, Luffy and his group eventually stumble upon as well. The Kerberos, the graveyard zombies, the haunted mansion, etc. They're all following in Usopp's footsteps. So it's like Usopp is going through a haunted house, and then, slightly later, Luffy is going through the same haunted house but with all of the work lights on, and so none of it's scary anymore. In fact, it's having very much the opposite effect. Almost every creature that Luffy runs into is scared of him. So Thriller Bark really isn't a problem for anyone else. Luffy, Robin, Zoro, Sanji, and Frankie are all having the time of their lives off on another fun adventure, whereas this challenge is very personal for Usopp. It's where he needs to seriously step up. It's where he needs to conquer his fears and claim his spot on this crew. And that opportunity did present itself. Because prior to the conflict with Oz, there was one instance where Usopp had backup from the heavy hitters of the crew, but on this one occasion, they were immediately stripped from him by Perona. Zoro, Sanji, Frankie, all of them were taken out in a single hit by the negative hollows. And Luffy was taken out earlier on in the arc. so Usopp can't rely on him either. And in a sickening twist of nightmarish hell, Usopp is the only one immune from Perona's negative hollows, meaning that Usopp's worst nightmare has now come true as he has to walk onto the most terrifying battlefield he's ever set foot all on his own, knowing that there is absolutely no one who can help him, which I believe is the first time that Usopp has had to do this since fighting Chu during Arlong Park. In every other fight, he's had some form of support, like teaming up with Chopper on Alabasta. Usopp also had Sanji with him a lot of the time during Skypiea, and even on Little Garden, Usopp had Karoo. There's usually always someone there for him to fall back on. But not this time, and not against this opponent. And the idea of Perona having ghost powers as well as being labeled as a ghost princess should not be overlooked. She gets a bit pushed to the side in favor of Junk in the Trunk Echo Moria, but Thriller Bark itself is referred to as the Ghost Island. And so Usopp taking on someone with ghost powers is representative of him standing up to the island and indeed the idea of fear itself. Because Usopp is now fighting an opponent with intangible power. For a lot of the fight, he quite literally cannot touch Perona. And in fact, apart from some sticky goop, I don't think Usopp ever does touch Perona, which is very much like trying to fight the concept of fear. You can't just punch it until it shuts up. You can't touch it, so you got to fight fear in other ways. Primarily mental ways, which brings us to Usopp's main weapon during this fight. Perona's negative hollows elicit and overwhelm their targets with depressing thoughts. In some cases, they magnify innate securities, but they also create artificial negativity as well, which is why they're effective against even Luffy, someone who generally doesn't think negatively about anything and always has 100% belief in himself and his abilities. However, the reason why Perona's powers are completely ineffective against Usopp is because he's already well and truly immersed in that realm of negativity. In fact, he's on a completely different level of negativity, and he even managed to depress the ghosts that were sent to attack him, which rather comically results in a scenario where just as Luffy was the only person on Skypiea capable of standing up to Enel, Usopp becomes the only person on Thriller Bark capable of standing up against Perona. The main difference is that on Skypiea, Luffy's greatest strength was his greatest strength, the fact that he was rubber. Whereas on Thriller Bark, Usopp's greatest strength is also his greatest weakness, which is a very tricky balancing act, because you do need to be somewhat positive to pick yourself up and fight in the first place. And one of my favorite running gags during this fight is Perona trying to defeat Usopp, but also constantly reassuring him, saying stuff like, life isn't all that bad, which is both hilarious and also a bit clever, because if Usopp starts thinking positively at all, then he has lost this fight. He needs to remain in the depths of his own self-doubt to succeed, but he cannot be consumed by that doubt. He's essentially treading water in an ocean of doubt, hoping that his efforts will be enough to beat Perona before he drowns. But Perona is a very special opponent. I've talked about this effect a lot with Luffy versus Katakuri, but Usopp versus Perona was one of the original One Piece mirror matches, because what we've got here are two liars going up against each other, each trying to make the other believe that they're an order of magnitude more powerful than they really are. And the win condition for this fight is that the first person to believe those lies loses. Now, Perona's lies are primarily constructed through her astral projection ability, where she leaves her body and becomes an intangible opponent, which is a very interesting matchup for Usopp, as usually Usopp is so scared of his opponents due to them being overwhelmingly physically superior to him. So in many ways, there's no reason to be scared of Perona because she can't, physically hit him like everyone else can. All she can do is lie and try to make Usopp believe that she can. She can, however, fight using ghost projectiles that do explode and cause very real damage, which is the situation that Usopp usually finds himself in. Yes, Usopp can physically touch his opponents. It's very not recommended though, because he's so weak that it doesn't have any effect, and so Usopp is usually relegated to using projectiles for damage, which generally isn't quite enough. Usopp needs to concoct clever and convoluted plans in order to beat stronger opponents, which is also the same for Perona. Perona has to try to defeat Usopp using a series of stupid tricks, like flying in front of him whilst running away to obstruct his vision and causing him to cartoonishly collide with a column. So all throughout this fight, Perona is using the combat manual that Usopp authored. And that's what makes this so much worse, because he is losing against his own tricks. Much like how far, far into the future, Luffy would find himself in the same position against Katakuri, essentially losing to his own abilities and very much struggling to overcome that feeling of inevitable superiority. And it's one thing to put Luffy in a situation like that because of his unbreakable wall of willpower, but Usopp is more like a wall of easily shattered sugar glass, and he comes dangerously close to actually believing Perona's lie and losing. This is the point during the fight where Usopp does mentally retreat into the persona of Sogeking. For the second, and as of the time of this recording, final time in the series. And Usopp does this because he reaches a point where his negativity is no longer an asset. He's on the verge of defeat, and so he flicks a switch in his mind to activate the brave king of Sniper Island. And Usopp then proceeds to have a conversation with, I guess, himself, with Sogeking telling Usopp to just calm down, mate, and that he can handle this. He's a big scary man. And this is a very hype moment because I love Sogeking. However, seeing Sogeking in this moment is very not good for Usopp, because this persona was created as a result of Usopp not feeling like he was truly part of the crew. He couldn't bring himself to stand by their side, so Usopp made an OC of his ideal self to stand with the Straw Hats in their time of need to rescue Robin. And very importantly, this isn't just because Usopp had left the crew and couldn't bring himself to talk to Luffy. It's because of what we've already discussed, that Usopp felt he was too weak to be a Straw Hat. And so Sogeking re-emerges on Thriller Bark because Usopp is having those same feelings again, but on a much more intense scale. Because he finally found something that he thought he was good at. Something that he could contribute to the crew that no one else could. Something they needed him for. But he couldn't even do that. Even with his complete immunity to the Hollows, Usopp was being destroyed by Perona. And that made him feel even worse than trying to go up against some sort of insurmountably physical opponent. Because at least Usopp has a good excuse to lose against someone like Jabra. He's a very big, strong wolf man. But Perona, someone who Usopp seems to have been fatefully put onto this planet to counter, losing to this opponent is one of the greatest pits of shame that Usopp has ever fallen into. Because if he can't succeed here, then in his mind, he really does not deserve to be part of the crew. And taking out the Sogeking mask is an admission of that. It's saying, I can't do it, please someone else step in to save the day. But then the moment of truth arrives. Perona once again hits Usopp with exploding hollows, and the Sogeking mask falls off. And this is the moment where Usopp makes a choice. That choice is to either put that mask back on and probably defeat Perona, but by doing so admitting that he didn't have the inner strength to accomplish it, or to leave the mask on the floor and finish this fight as Straw Hat Sniper Usopp. And what I love about this is that Usopp doesn't even hesitate with his decision. The mask comes off and Usopp stands up and chooses to finish the fight on his own. And the mistake that a lot of people make is in believing that this was a battle of negativity, that this was about Usopp embracing and coming to terms with his negative thoughts, which to be fair, it is, but that's only half the fight. Because Usopp's other key character trait is that he is a liar, and so is Perona. I don't think there's many other crew members who would have figured out what Perona was doing during this fight. I think that Robin may have stood a mental chance, but every other crew member at the time would have been either too dumb to physically focused or too horny to figure out this ghost puzzle. I mean, just think about how Sanji would have handled this. Because Perona's a woman, he wouldn't even have tried to hit her, so he wouldn't have even figured out that she was intangible. Not that it would have mattered anyway, because Perona hard counters all of them with negative hollows. But lies and tricks, those are the specialty of a certain Usopp, and he was able to swiftly dissect Perona's illusion because he is an expert in creating them himself. Sort of like how a magician can watch another magician and understand how an illusion was achieved. Usopp recognized the craftsmanship of Perona's lies, and he ended up using Perona's own illusion to defeat her. There's a key moment during this fight where Perona thrusts her hands into Usopp's chest and makes him believe that she is going to crush his heart. And Usopp does genuinely believe that he is about to die for a moment before this gets turned into a gag with Perona saying, yeah, I can't actually do that. But this gag was the key to Usopp's victory. After understanding how Perona constructed a lie to get him to believe that he was going to die, Usopp then meticulously created his own series of lies to drive Perona to that same state. Step 1. Usopp used an impact dial to defeat Lieutenant Gentleman Hippo, which made Perona believe that Usopp had insane physical strength that he'd just been hiding until now. Perona herself didn't see the dial, nor would she be in any way familiar with the technology because she's never been to Sky Island. So POV, your Perona ride, what you are seeing is a disgusting display of 100% raw strength, which is an integral foundation for what happens next. Step 2. Usopp fires a volley of cockroaches at Perona's real body, although I should point out that the cockroaches themselves weren't even real, because remember, this is a battle of lies. The fake cockroaches do serve two purposes though. One, to put Perona in a very emotionally distraught state, more likely to be overwhelmed by fear. And secondly, as a distraction for step 3, which was to inflate a giant fake 10-ton hammer which Perona believes that Usopp can lift because she saw his display of strength with the impact dial illusion, but more importantly, she didn't see the hammer being inflated due to the cockroach illusion. So classic quick magician maneuver. Look what's happening over here to hide what's happening over here. Then step 4, make Perona believe that she is about to die, which Usopp does with this phenomenal line. You might be scared of roaches, but you should be more frightened by how much you underestimated me. I'm known to be the strongest man in East Blue. And this is very similar to Perona stating that she's capable of crushing Usopp's heart. Usopp here is saying that he is about to crush her. And I'd like to point out that neither one of them has any substance to back up their claims, so what happens when two liars clash? Usopp's final hammer attack is his version of what Perona did to him when she threatened to crush his heart. It was an elaborate bluff, and in each case, Usopp and Perona were 100% convinced that they were about to die. However, after going through this trial, only one person remained conscious to see the bluff through, and that person was Usopp. He endured his crippling fear, whereas Perona succumbed to it. Fear overwhelmed her and she fell unconscious, with Usopp ending the fight by stating, "It was your mistake to challenge me in a duel of negativity and lying," which I think is still my favorite Usopp line of all time. This was Usopp proving for the first time since Arlong Park that he had the ability to be a Straw Hat. And that's why we haven't seen the Sogeking mask again since, because Sogeking was who Usopp became when he felt unworthy to stand alongside his crewmates. Someone he wished that he could be, and someone who he did actually become on Thriller Bark against Perona. Usopp conquered his fears. He did something that no other Straw Hat could have done and took the biggest step to date towards his dream of becoming a brave warrior of the sea. I should say that we do see Sogeking once more. However, it's during Return to Sabadi where Monblutane is pretending to be Sogeking, who is then quickly defeated by post-time skip Usopp, symbolically showing that Usopp has now become even more than he'd ever dreamed of being pre-time skip. And that's why I don't think we'll ever see Sogeking again, because Usopp is no longer afraid that he doesn't belong on this crew. For the Sogeking mask to be pulled out once more would require a character crisis on a scale that I'm not sure we have time for in the final saga of One Piece. It would need Usopp to revert and undo 18 years of character development and progression. And it's not like Usopp hasn't faced serious challenges post-time skip. He has, but in every case he has chosen to face those challenges as himself, as the Straw Hat sniper Usopp, not Sogeking. And in fact, our issue currently is that Usopp's self is getting a bit out of control, with multiple statues having now been built in his honor, the epithet God Usopp being given to him as a result of Dressrosa, and currently being worth 500 million berries. So Usopp's modern day challenge isn't to live up to Sogeking, it's to live up to the legend that is himself.